The fluorescent lights flickered above the hospital corridor, casting cold shadows on Grace's face as she overheard the words that cut deeper than any scalpel. "She's just the night shift nurse." Lila's voice, dripping with disdain, echoed from the break room, followed by James's low chuckle, her husband's betrayal slicing through her heart. By the time Grace reached the end of her shift, her hands trembled not from exhaustion, but from the weight of their mockery. Grace, at 40, had spent 15 years at St. Mary's Hospital, her life woven into its sterile halls. She was the nurse who stayed late, who held patients' hands through their final breaths, who memorized every chart and comforted every terrified family. But to James, her husband of 12 years, and Lila, the glamorous hospital administrator, she was invisibly a cog in the machine, unworthy of respect. Their affair had been an open secret among the staff for months, whispered behind clipboards and in locker rooms. Grace had ignored the rumors, clinging to the hope that James, the charismatic chief surgeon, still loved her. But that night, as she stood frozen outside the break room, their words shattered her denial. "Grace thinks she's indispensable," Lila had sneered. "As if a nurse could ever matter like we do." James's laughter followed, a sound that once warmed Grace's heart but now felt like a slap. She pressed her back against the wall, her scrubs damp with sweat, and fought the tears burning her eyes. She wasn't just hurt, she was furious. Not at their affair, but at their arrogance, their dismissal of her worth. Grace had always believed in the quiet power of kindness, of showing up when others turned away. But that night, something shifted. She wouldn't let their cruelty define her. Grace drove home in silence, the city lights blurring through her tears. Their modest house, once filled with laughter and shared dreams, now felt like a museum of her failures. James was rarely home, claiming late surgeries. But Grace knew better now. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the worn photo of their wedding day, her in a simple white dress, him beaming with pride. How had they drifted so far? She thought of their early years, when James called her his anchor, when they planned a future of saving lives together. But success had changed him. The hospital's elite circle, Lila included, fed his ego. And Grace, with her late-night shifts and unassuming demeanor, became a shadow in his world. The next morning, Grace woke with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. She wouldn't confront James or Lila, not yet. She wouldn't scream or cry or beg for respect. Instead, she would show them who she was. Grace had been quietly saving for years, tucking away every extra dollar from her shifts, her overtime, her skipped vacations. She had a plan, one she'd never shared with James, who dismissed her as just a nurse. The hospital was struggling financially, its board desperate for a buyer. Grace had been researching, connecting with investors, and leveraging her years of insight into St. Mary's operations. She wasn't just a nurse, she was a strategist, a silent force who knew the hospital's heart better than anyone. That day, Grace met with her financial advisor, a sharp woman named Clara who believed in her vision. "You're sitting on enough to make a serious move," Clara said, sliding a folder across the table. "The hospital's valuation is low right now, perfect timing." Grace nodded, her pulse quickening. She wasn't just buying a building. She was reclaiming her dignity. She signed the initial papers, her hand steady, her heart pounding with purpose. This was her first step toward rewriting her story. At the hospital, Grace kept her head down, enduring Lila's condescending smiles and James's distracted glances. They didn't notice the fire in her eyes, the way she lingered in meetings, absorbing every detail about the hospital's finances. She overheard board members whispering about a mysterious investor, someone negotiating to buy St. Mary's. Lila, ever the opportunist, bragged about charming the buyer, oblivious to the truth. Grace let her talk, let James nod along, let them believe they were untouchable. She worked her shifts, cared for her patients, and quietly built her case with Clara, gathering support from nurses and staff who respected her tireless dedication. By the end of the week, Grace's plan was in motion. She met with the hospital's board in secret, presenting her proposal. They were Stanita Nurse, of all people, with the capital and vision to save Street Mary's. But her numbers were solid, her passion undeniable. "I've seen this place from the ground up," she told them, her voice steady. "I know what it needs to thrive." The board agreed to consider her offer, but Grace knew the real battle was coming. James and Lila would never see it coming. Grace's days became a blur of purpose, each shift a balancing act between her duties and her secret mission. She worked nights, soothing patients through pain and fear, while her mind churned with numbers and strategies. By day, she met with Clara, refining her proposal. The hospital's financial troubles were worse than most realized. Equipment was outdated, staff were underpaid, and patient care was suffering. Grace saw it all firsthand: the overworked nurses, the frustrated doctors, the families who deserved better. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for them. James, meanwhile, grew more distant. He barely acknowledged Grace at home, his mind consumed by his status and his affair with Lila. At a hospital gala, Grace watched them from across the room, Lila in a glittering red dress, James in a tailored suit, their laughter loud and performative. Grace, in her simple black dress, felt invisible to them, but not to the staff. Nurses squeezed her hand. Orderlies shared knowing looks. They saw her, the woman who never faltered, who remembered their names and their struggles. That night, a young nurse named Mia pulled Grace aside. "You're better than them," Mia whispered. "Don't let them break you." Grace smiled, her resolve hardening. She wouldn't break build. Clara introduced Grace to a group of silent investors, people who trusted her vision but preferred to stay anonymous. They were impressed by her detailed plan: modernize equipment, increase staff wages, and prioritize patient care over profit. Grace's years of listening, of understanding the hospital's pulse, gave her an edge no boardroom executive could match. She spoke their language, but with a heart they couldn't replicate. By the end of the month, her offer was nearly finalized, pending one last board meeting. Grace felt a thrill she hadn't known in years, not just hope, but power. At home, James's arrogance grew unbearable. He criticized Grace's long hours, oblivious to her savings or her meetings. "You're wasting your life in that hospital," he said one night, tossing his keys on the counter. "You could have been more." Grace. The word stung, but she swallowed her retort. Let him think that, she told herself. She was done proving herself to him. Instead, she poured her energy into her patients, into the nurses who confided in her, into the plan that would change everything. Lila, too, sensed a shift but misread it. She cornered Grace in the locker room, her smile sharp as a blade. "You look tired." "Grace, night shifts must be brutal." Grace met her gaze, unflinching. "I manage," she said simply. But inside, she was counting the days until Lila's smugness crumbled. The hospital buzzed with rumors about the mysterious buyer, and Lila, ever confident, assumed she'd win their favor. She didn't know Grace was the buyer, that the woman she mocked was about to rewrite the rules. Grace's nights were sleepless, not from doubt, but from anticipation. She imagined the boardroom, the moment she'd reveal her hand. She pictured James's shock, Lila's disbelief. But more than that, she dreamed of a hospital where nurses were valued, where patients came first, where her work meant something. She wasn't just buying street. Mary, she was reclaiming her voice, her worth, her life. The board meeting was set for a Friday, and Grace prepared like a general before battle. She wore a simple navy dress, her hair neatly pinned, but her presence carried a quiet authority. Clara coached her through every detail, ensuring her proposal was ironclad. The board respected her, but some hesitated. Could a nurse really lead? Grace anticipated their doubts and countered with data, passion, and a vision that left them speechless. "I've held this hospital together," she said. "Give me the chance to make it soar." Meanwhile, James and Lila planned their own power play. They'd heard about the buyer and assumed it was a wealthy outsider they could charm. Lila drafted proposals to secure her position as administrator, while James angled for more influence as chief surgeon. They laughed over wine, plotting their future, unaware that Grace was steps ahead. She'd secured the final signatures, her investors fully committed. Street. Mary's was hers, pending the board's public announcement. Grace kept her secret even from her closest allies at the hospital. Only Clara knew the full scope, and she urged Grace to savor the moment. "They'll never see you the same way again," Clara said, her eyes gleaming. Grace nodded, but her focus wasn't just on James and Lily, it was on the nurses who'd been overlooked, the patients who'd been rushed through care, the hospital that deserved better. She was doing this for them, for herself, for the woman she'd almost forgotten how to be. The night before the meeting, Grace worked her shift as always. A young patient, a boy named Ethan, clung to her hand during a painful procedure. "You're the best nurse," he whispered, his eyes bright with trust. Grace's heart swelled. She didn't need James's approval or Lila's respect. She had this, the quiet gratitude of those she helped. It fueled her as she walked into the boardroom the next morning, her folder of documents clutched tightly. The room was packed. Board members, staff, James, and Lila, who sat smugly in the front row. The chairman began, outlining the hospital's financial woes and the need for new ownership. Whispers rippled through the crowd as he introduced the buyer. Grace stood, her voice clear and steady. "I'm Grace Harper," she said, "and I'm here to save Street Mary's." The room fell silent, then erupted in gasps. James's face drained of color. Lila's mouth fell open. Grace didn't look at them, she looked at the nurses, the orderlies, the people who'd believed in her. This was her moment. Grace's announcement hit the room like a thunderclap. She stood tall, her voice unwavering as she outlined her vision, a hospital where staff were valued, where patients were family, where profit didn't trump care. The board members nodded, impressed by her precision and passion. The nurses in the back cheered, their faces alight with pride. James and Lila, however, sat frozen, their confidence shattered. Grace didn't gloat, she didn't need to. Her presence, her plan, her victory spoke louder than any taunt. She detailed her financial backing, her years of savings, her investor support. She spoke of the nurses' overtime struggles, the outdated equipment, the patients who deserved better. "I've seen this hospital's heart," she said, "and I know how to make it beat stronger." The board voted unanimously. St. Mary's was hers. The applause was deafening. But Grace's eyes found James and Lila, their faces pale with shock. She felt no joy in their defeat, only a quiet resolve to move forward. After the meeting, the hospital buzzed with excitement. Nurses hugged Grace, tears in their eyes. "You did it," Mia whispered. "You showed them." Grace smiled, but her work was just beginning. She met with Clara to finalize the transition, signing contracts that made her ownership official. The weight of it was immense, but Grace felt lighter than she had in years. She was no longer just a nurse, she was a force. James cornered her that evening in the parking lot, his face a mix of anger and disbelief. "How could you do this behind my back?" he demanded. Grace met his gaze, unflinching. "You did plenty behind mine," she said softly. "This isn't about you, James. It's about the hospital, the people I care about." He stormed off, his pride wounded. But Grace felt no regret. She was done living in his shadow. Lila, too, tried to salvage her position. She approached Grace the next day, her tone falsely sweet. "We can work together, Grace. I know the administrative side." Grace's smile was polite but firm. I need people who value this hospital's heart. Lila, that's not you. Lila's face fell, and she walked away, her heels clicking on the linoleum. Grace didn't watch her gosh had a hospital to run. Grace's first act as owner was to meet with the staff. She gathered them in the hospital cafeteria, her voice warm but resolute. You're the backbone of Street Mary's, she said. Your work matters, and I'm here to make sure it's valued. She announced raises for nurses and support staff, new equipment, and a patient-first model. The room erupted in cheers. But Grace's heart swelled most when she saw Ethan's mother, who hugged her tightly. You saved my boy's life, she said. Now you're saving this place. James and Lila's influence faded quickly. James, humiliated, took a leave of absence, unable to face the staff who now looked to Grace for leadership. Lila resigned, her reputation tarnished by her own arrogance. Grace didn't dwell on their downfall. She was too busy implementing her vision. She hired a new administrator, a compassionate woman who shared her values, and promoted Mia to head nurse. The hospital began to change, brighter halls, better care, a sense of pride that hadn't existed before. Grace's personal life, however, was harder to rebuild. She moved out of the house she'd shared with James, renting a small apartment near the hospital. It was modest but hers, filled with books and plants and the quiet peace of independence. She filed for divorce, not out of anger but clarity. James had chosen his path, and Grace deserved better. She found solace in her work, in the patients who thanked her, in the staff who became her family. One night, as Grace walked the halls, she paused at Ethan's room. He was asleep, his small chest rising and falling. His mother sat beside him, her eyes tired but grateful. You're a hero, she told Grace. The word stayed with Grace long after her shift ended, a reminder of why she'd fought so hard. She wasn't just a nurse, she was a leader, a healer, a woman who'd reclaimed her worth. Word of Grace's takeover spread beyond Street Mary's. Local news ran stories about the nurse who bought the hospital, painting her as a beacon of hope. Other hospitals reached out, asking for her advice on staff welfare and patient care. Grace spoke at conferences, her voice steady, her story inspiring. She didn't seek fame, but she embraced the chance to amplify her message. Kindness and competence could change the world. At Street Mary's, the changes were tangible. New equipment arrived, staff morale soared, and patient outcomes improved. Grace walked the halls daily, listening to her team, adjusting her plans based on their needs. She wasn't perfect, she made mistakes, faced pushback, but she learned, adapted, and grew. The hospital became a model of what healthcare could be, a place where people mattered more than profits. James returned after his leave, quieter, humbler. He approached Grace one evening, his eyes weary. I was wrong, he said. About you. About us. Grace listened, her heart calm. She didn't hate him, she pitied him. I hope you find what you're looking for, she said, and meant it. She had no room for resentment. Her life was too full. Lila, meanwhile, faded into obscurity, her career stalled by her own hubris. Grace heard she'd taken a job at a smaller clinic, but she didn't care. Her focus was on the Futurian Ethan, who was discharged with a bright smile, on Mia, who thrived as head nurse, on the hospital that felt like home. A year later, Street Mary's was unrecognizable. The halls were bright, the staff empowered, the patients cared for with a warmth that radiated. Grace stood at the ribbon cutting for a new pediatric wing, her heart full as Ethan, now healthy, cut the ribbon beside her. The crowd cheered, but Grace's eyes were on her team, the nurses, the orderlies, the doctors who'd embraced her vision. This was their victory, too. Grace never forgot the sting of those words, just a nurse. They'd fueled her, not to prove others wrong, but to prove herself right. She'd shown the world that a nurse could lead, that kindness could triumph. that a quiet heart could roar. Her divorce was finalized. Her apartment a sanctuary. Her life her own. She dated occasionally. But her true love was her work. Her hospital. Her people. One evening, as Grace walked the quiet halls, she paused at a window, the city lights sparkling below. She thought of her younger self, the woman who'd doubted her worth, who'd let James and Lila's mockery dim her light. That woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, unafraid. Grace smiled, her reflection steady in the glass. She wasn't just a nurse, she was the heart of Street Mary's, and she'd build a legacy that would outlast them all.